Thank you everybody for joining this evening to listen to my story, and hopefully it will just show you how important it is to donate and the change that it can make, not just for the recipient, but for the donor family as well. So Mum, she was 63 when she suffered a cardiac arrest whilst at home in July 2021. My dad was there, thankfully. He did what anybody would do. He called for an ambulance and started CPR. Mum suffered a further 3 arrests that evening before finally being transferred to the critical care team at Basingstoke Hospital. My sister and I, thankfully, were able to see her around about 1 o'clock in the morning after the teams had spent almost 5 hours trying to stabilise Mum. We were told that due to the cardiac arrest, she had suffered some brain damage, but at that time, in the middle of the night, the extent of that damage was unknown. So we stayed for a while. We were suited and booted in some magnificent COVID suits from top to bottom, but we managed to give her a hug and a kiss, and, you know, as you do, love you very much, and came back the next day. So we were hoping for, I suppose we weren't expecting massively positive news, but a little bit of positive news would be good. Sadly, the following morning we were asked to come back in early. We were promptly met by Mum's consultant. The new consultant, the one that we'd seen the night before, was the on-call consultant. This chap, he asked us if we understood what had happened to Mum and her condition, and asked, quite rightly, in my opinion, if he could just speak plainly to us. You know, no gibberish, nothing, just set the facts out. And the response was, Mum's brain damage was more severe than had first thought, and overnight her reflexes had stopped, the last being pupil dilation. And then there was nothing that could be done, unfortunately. At this point, my sister and I were still there with my dad. My sister broke down, and I froze. You know, I'd lost my mum, my best friend, and, you know, coincidentally, both my sister and we'd FaceTimed my mum the day before she collapsed. So we took comfort knowing this, but I still regretted, funnily enough, not popping in a couple of days earlier with flowers. I was very close to her house and I didn't. Instead, I had them delivered. So I still have the WhatsApp message from her saying, you know, beautiful, thank you so much. So that brings me comfort. The consultant was amazing. He gave us as much time as we needed, and he judged, much as George mentioned earlier, he judged when the time was right, and he approached us and said that Mum had registered as an organ donor. Were we aware of this, and would we consider going down that route of her being a donor? And it was an instant yes. I mean, honestly, the 3 of us were sat in that room, and it was just a resounding yes. We didn't have to look at each other. We just knew. Partly, I think, because, you know, Mum was caring, you know, thoughtful, generous, all the things that everybody's mum is. But she was always thinking of others and putting them first. And, you know, she would give you everything she could, and she did. You know, she gave absolutely everything. So we were never going to deny her that honour. Her wish, she wanted to be a donor. I've still got her Boots Advantage card, and it's got the little symbol on there showing that she wanted to be a donor. And actually, from here on in, it was a positive story, as positive as it can be given the circumstances. We were introduced to our specialist nurse from the blood and transplant team. I can't remember her name, but she was amazing. There were 2 of them. But she was great. She walked us through what would happen, how long it takes, and because the process does take a little bit of time, we were thankful we actually got an extra 24 hours with Mum. So we were able to sit by her bedside, you know, play music. We took some pictures of the grandchildren up, so she wasn't alone at any point in the room. She always had those memories. We weren't rushed. We knew that there would be recipients waiting, but it was never, you need to make a decision now. You know, we need to get this moving. It was take as long as you need. So the team, we did have a few issues, which actually in a roundabout way gave us longer with Mum. The GP surgery that she was with were not particularly forthcoming, and the donor team struggled to get information from them. And the downside to that was actually some of the questions that we had to answer were quite, I suppose you could either more sensitive or intrusive in nature, things that were on her medical records that the GP surgery, had they have done what they should have done, a lot of those answers would be there. But we're a very close family. You know, we knew all of the information between us. None of us, you know, are shy about discussing anything. So for us, practically, it wasn't an issue. Emotionally, we probably would have rather have skipped that element. So the nurse stayed with Mum throughout. I was with, stayed with her throughout and with the operation and through to the mortuary as well. I'm quite a pragmatic person, and the way that I coped was by asking questions. I asked an awful lot of questions. I wanted to know the detail, you know, even down to what happened during the operation when she went down. How did it work? I kept a lot of the questions away from my sister and my dad, just to make sure that they weren't offended by anything, but I needed to know. And the nurse picked up on it, and she actually offered to take me down to the theatre with Mum before she went in, and to be there when Mum was released from the theatre and come out, and I could have done all sorts of things, you know, washing her, redressing her, all of these things. And I would have loved to have done that, but because of the timing, Mum didn't go down until about 4 a.m. on the Sunday morning, and by that point I had nothing left. I was all out and no more energy. So the lady stayed with her, and she gave me a call really early Sunday morning. I think it's about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, to say that everything had gone ahead. They'd managed to take the organs that had all been discussed and agreed, and they'd been ferried off to various different parts of the country. She was able to donate her liver, both kidneys, and her corneas as well. And she went on to save the lives of 3 people. Plus, we don't know how many people received the corneas, or if they're still being kept. But she has saved the lives of 3 people. A gentleman received 1 kidney and a lady received another. And I think George touched on this. One of the best things to come out of it is we were contacted by a young lady in her 30s. I'm also in my 30s, so she was very close in age to me, and she'd received Mum's liver. And not only was she grateful for receiving the liver, the fact that she could now live the life that she was denied, she also had a young daughter who was the same age as my daughter. So knowing that I may have lost, you know, one of the most important people in my life, this little girl gets to keep hers, and Mum would be so proud of the fact that she did that. And you know, those things, you can't change what happened in the past. You know, Mum is gone, but knowing that 3 other people are alive because of it, you know, Mum's memory will live on. We will always think about it and always have stories to talk about. And I think people often ask us, you know, was it a difficult decision? You know, it must have been difficult knowing, but actually it wasn't. You know, we knew Mum was on the register. We knew it's what she wanted to do, and it's not for us. If we were against it, it's not for us to make that decision. She wanted to donate. We just made sure that happened. We facilitated that, and you know, we are very, very pleased that we did. So I think the lasting message to everybody on this call and wider to family and friends is to have that conversation. You can donate if you haven't had the conversation, but it's so much easier. You know, I would have hated to have sat there and thought, well, would Mum want to donate? Maybe not. And then you think, well, let's donate. And then you think, oh, she doesn't want to. All of these what ifs, you know, you've got enough on your plate dealing with the death of your loved one. Let's just have that conversation. You don't have to worry. And I think the more people talk about it in general conversation, even in the office, start having a coffee, just mention it. They might think you're a bit weird, but just mention it. You know, they will remember that conversation because it was so out of the blue. So I think just to end, I would thank you for listening to my family story. So in memory of Mum. Sue, thank you.